So my name is Norton, and I'm the Director of Agency-Based Education. And we've been doing these conferences for a number of years, and today I'm going to present on something that I've sort of presented on in the past, but in a slightly different way. And I hope that this is something that people will share with others, especially people that they haven't ever done something different for their children's education. Educational risk tolerance in the 21st century. I want to talk a little about the way things are changing. So about 20 years ago, I got involved in some stock market trading. Has anybody ever heard of 3DFX? That's what I thought. So about 20 years ago, they were a high-end graphics card company. They made computer graphics cards, and they were at the top of the game. Well, I got involved watching their stock, and they had the world's most predictable stock. Every time a graphics card was released by them, their stock price just shot straight up. And then after a short period of time, it would just trickle right back down to where it had been. And I could see this happening over and over again. And so rather than buy the stock and sell the stock, because it's pricey to buy a stock, I bought options. And if you don't know what stock options are, it's basically a way to lock in a price that you can buy or sell a stock at if the stock price changes. So I bought, let's say when the stock was $80, and bought these options so that if it went up to $100, I had an option to buy it at 80 when the value was 100, right? And you only had to pay a small fee for it. But if the price went down, then you lost your money because the option was worthless. Nobody wanted to buy it higher. But options get traded like that in the market. And so I got involved trading this, and I saw 3DFX was going to come out with their next greatest card, and I thought, all right, you know, I've done this a couple of times. Their card's coming out in 2 months. Called up my broker, and I said, all right, buy me some calls on 3DFX. I want the 6-month calls, and you know, here's how much money I want to spend on it. And he said, are you sure you don't want to buy the 3-month calls? And I was like, yeah, no, 6 months is good. He said, well, you can make a lot more money with the 3-month call. Well, no, 6 months is good. Are you sure? Because, you know, 3-month calls, you can get a lot more money with them. Well, the card comes out in 2 months. All right, go ahead. Let's do the 3-month stock options. Well, about a month and a half later, 3DFX announced manufacturing delays on their card. And lo and behold, it was going to take a couple more months to release the card. And with the announcement, the stock price dropped, and they delayed long enough that my options expired. And I lost all my money. But the worst thing about it was my parents' money. Ouch. So that was the last stock option that I traded. Normally, when we think about risk, you think, well, if something's risky, there's a lot of reward. You know, that's typically how risk-reward graphs work. I risked and I lost. But also, as we age, we take less risks because we want to preserve whatever gains that we've made as we get older. We know that when we're young, we can risk more because we have more time to try to make up for it in later years and correct for any losses. So for me, I was pretty risk tolerant. I was young, you know, thought, hey, this is going to work. It's happened a couple of times. So I was very risk tolerant, but if I'd been risk averse, I would have said, just keep the cash in the bank. I don't want to lose anything. I want to preserve it. Well, for our children, they're a sacred investment. And you can't say easy come, easy go when it comes to your children. You can't just walk down to the store and pick up a new one if you lose one. So we're very risk averse when it comes to anything that might potentially cause pain, especially if it deals with our family. And decades ago, the risk averse position was having your child in public school. And the risk tolerant, risky thing was homeschooling, because that was the weird option for anybody that, you know, didn't just do the status quo, put their kids in school. Most of us grew up with a fairly good public school education, and as a result of that, we think, well, I had a positive past experience, my kids are going to have a positive past experience, future experience. But we forget that investment saying past results are not necessarily indicative of future returns. So I want to look at a few headlines that I saw just in preparing this talk the last few weeks. 18% of children now leave school as low achievers, report shows. Why? Because they're bored. It's compulsory education that restricts their agency. They couldn't conform, they have family issues, got into serious trouble, whatever it is. But that's nearly 1 in 5 kids leaving school as a, quote, low achiever. Teachers love Google's education products, but are suspicious. Why is a mega corporation giving them a perfect tool for free? Is anything free? Children are being taught to trust Google with their information. Florida is scooping up huge amounts of data on school children, including security camera footage and discipline records, and researchers are worried, as they should be. Most teachers quite disturbed about their union's push for sexualization and indoctrination of school children. Here's an actual lesson plan. Somebody sent me this about a month ago. This is on a Google Drive that was public. And so I went out and grabbed a screenshot and information. It's LGBTQ and Equity Week lesson plans. And so first graders will learn about pronouns, second grade fairy tales, fourth and fifth gender norms, 6th to 8th history, activism, and art. Kindergarten, familia. I'm not sure what that's going to be. And then special ed, they're going to discuss the rainbow flag. This is what a public school teacher is preparing for their school district. Kansas, 12-year-old girl charged with a felony for pointing a finger gun in school. A felony to point their finger. New policy in Seattle public schools requires teaching that math is racist. The draft framework that says that Western math is, quote, used to disenfranchise people and communities of color. It proposes questions like, where does power and oppression show up in our math experiences? I think that's exponents, right? That's power. Why can't we just teach math? But wait, this is Seattle, it's not Utah. We don't have anything to worry about here, except at BYU. Solving social injustice, one math problem at a time. This is from 2014. Most of the rest of the colleges have bought into this as well. They're not solving anything. They're creating a world where the people are envious and they have class distinctions that pit people against each other. If we would just teach math and not worry about the social agenda that goes along with it, the world would be a better place. And we'd move things along and we'd stop the social injustices of the world by actually having people that are educated and know where they want to go in life. So, is this slide really accurate these days? Or has it switched? Is it now risk tolerant to send our kids to school and risk averse to do something different? Seems to me that we're just headed more and more in this kind of direction because we keep taking federal money. Our legislators won't take care of Utah ourselves and say, let's get off the federal education dollar. And so the strings that are attached to those dollars are going to keep impacting Utah and forcing us down a certain course of action that is going to embrace these things. But the hard part is when people think, well, I went through public education and I'm not messed up, my kids will be fine. Like, first of all, you are messed up. Second, your kids are in a much different situation than we were as kids. Public schooling also implicitly teaches us that we don't know what's best for us. We're being told constantly what to do by somebody else and when to do it. And as a result, we don't develop our own agency, our own ability to make those decisions for ourselves until we're much older. And even then, we're sometimes crippled thinking, well, somebody just tell me what to do. I don't know exactly what I should do. I wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force. And when they told me I had to read The Grapes of Wrath, it was like somebody had handed me a live grenade and pulled the pin and said, you can't throw that away for weeks. I was like, Get away from me. I did not want to read that book. I did not have any relevance to that book, but I was forced to do it, which, of course, I didn't. So, as for my own, somebody sent me this image, which I thought explained my kind of upbringing pretty well, starting, all the way through math. I went through calculus and a little advanced calculus. I was going to be an engineer and then a pilot. But then after a 2-year mission for my church, I became an accountant, which kind of changed my the level of math required for what I was going to do. But I'm really glad I took calculus and physics, because physics explains the world. It was actually my favorite class. I saw the relevance in it. Well, I wanted to know about you and what your past experience was, what you went through in public education. And if you would do something different today. And so I asked people a few questions, and I sent this survey out a few weeks ago, and asked, regarding your childhood experience, in hindsight, what would you have done differently if you'd been able to? I asked what frustrated you, what would you change, and how would it be different? And I got back a few dozen responses. And I'm not going to read this slide. I'm just illustrating. I got a lot of different responses. Pretty much, there's very little overlap. There were a few common themes, but it was all over the place. Everybody was frustrated with different things. I'm just going to cover a few broad categories. So, boredom, time wasted through, either because of social experiments, uninteresting classes, student distractions, biased teaching, like propaganda, incorrect history, demeaned religion, others who cheated the system. This one's interesting, because we all know people that cheat the system, right? But what happens when you have a system? People are always looking for a shortcut because they didn't design the system. They're looking for, how do I get through somebody else's system as fast as I can, because I don't relate to this system. It's not mine. Forced conformity leads to someone else's defined outcomes. So let me say that again. Forced conformity down a conveyor belt leads to someone else's desired outcomes. It's not ours, it's somebody else's. They've planned it for us. Students are implicitly taught through the system that if you don't conform, you're forfeiting your future. So some rebel or cheat or die a little inside because their agency's been supplanted. Our children need to use and learn how to use their agency today more than ever. Schooling is not the same thing as education. So here's a few responses that I want to share with you that stood out to me. Make high school more like college so I can choose my own education. Shorten the school days so the entirety of my existence isn't school. I needed time to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. My public high school experience taught me how to learn to take a test, then forget all the info so I could learn more for the next test. I did not learn for the sake of learning like I did in elementary school. I recognize now that I was trained to do things a certain way. Public school was the right way, and anyone who didn't follow it was weird or bad. I think I spent a lot of time learning how to be afraid to fail instead of learning that failure and trying again is one of the very important parts of success. Fear of failure has held me back from taking risks and trying some things in my life. I've since learned that not trying at all on something that my heart is leading me to do is likely a bigger failure than trying and failing a few times in the process of learning how to do that thing. You know what might get in the way of success? Being told to try something and then being graded on it. Instead of just letting the failure or success teach the person the appropriate lesson. And last one, I was put into all the high-stress honors courses and essentially put on a path to take the most difficult and most important classes. I didn't have room for failure or to try something that really interested me. It was all about GPA and taking the right classes for scholarships. It failed to allow me to truly explore my own interests. I didn't want to fail. I just sort of did what you were supposed to do on the conveyor belt and gave up the idea of really doing anything for fun. These comments are tragic, and they came from just a few dozen people. Imagine a school of 2,000 kids, each one of them different. Do we really think as a society that children are similar enough to all need the same education? Isn't it time to consider each of our children as individuals with different needs? You and I know this is true at home. It's the same in school. We sometimes hear that first children are experiments, which is true, but really every child is an experiment. They all come with different needs, desires, skills, and talents. And so I want to tell you briefly about my 5 very different children and their education experiences. Our first child started in public school. She's the child that got me to become an activist. She went through charter schools and public schools all her educational career and supplemented math at home when math wasn't being taught at school. Our second child had some serious medical conditions. She got on an IEP. We had teachers come to our house on a weekly basis. She eventually did graduate from public schools, but she also did district and charter schools. Our third child is where things got really interesting. She came to us before 9th grade and said, I would like to not go to school this year and just study stuff on my own that I'm interested in. And I was like, what? Can we do this? She's like, well, you run agency-based education, Dad. Shouldn't I have my agency? And so I said, well, okay, I want you to write me an essay and tell me exactly why I should let you homeschool. And she did. She wrote an essay. It was a 2-page handwritten essay. And as it turned out, it was really well done and pretty convincing. And invoking Ben Franklin and others that, didn't do much public school at all. And so we agreed to let her do that. So in her 9th grade year, we just said, okay, we recognize at this point there will be no high school diploma, and you're on a different track, and that's okay. So she studied whatever she wanted. She was unschooled that year and just kept finding things to do. And she went through 2.5 years of math during that year, and that was awesome, and did some other things that she just found interesting. Then in her 10th grade year, this is where, again, she looked at what was available, and she said, all right, I'm planning out my year. I'm going to take sign language at the high school. I'm going to go to a homeschool co-op and take a political literature class that was taught by Connor Boyack over here. I'm going to go to this online charter school and take a few classes, and I'm going to homeschool for math. And she did seminary, so I had 4 or 5 different places and things going on. It was a busy year for us to get her around to everything, but she charted out what she wanted to do and did it. And she had such a positive experience with the online school that in 11th and 12th grade, she finished going through that school without a full load, so she still had time to do what she wanted, because she knew she wasn't trying to graduate. She was just like, here's the classes that interest me, I'm going to do those, and then I'll do other stuff at home. Well, when she graduated, she took the ACT 3 times. She wasn't overly experienced at taking tests because she'd avoided them. We'd avoided them, opted out of all the state tests and the nonsense that comes with those. And she just said, I need to get a little experience. So she took them 3 times to increase her scores, wound up getting a 4-year scholarship to a Utah college that she loves, and she has no high school diploma or a GED. It can be done, and our kids can have whatever kind of education experience they want to. Our 4th child, again, very different. She's got some trauma in her history. She quit school. There were a few years, it would start, it just quit. And so she stays at home, and so far this year, she's read 145 books. That's all she does. It's healing for her, and I'm okay with that. And that's her education. Our 5th child was our last experiment, and he started in homeschooling. He's the only one that didn't go to public school at all for about 5 years. And then we saw an opportunity with a program near us that was actually a charter school founded by homeschoolers to send him for 1.5 days a week for enrichment. There's no tests. It's just, hey, today we're going to study Japan, and for an art project, you're going to paint a cherry blossom tree, and we're going to talk about their economy. And so it was all just enrichment kind of stuff. And the rest of the week you homeschooled, and so it was kind of a hybrid. And this year he started, and we said, let's think about it. This was a lot of fun, it's good. There's some other options, but we decided to homeschool him with kind of a twist. So after he does his core work each day, he goes to his room, he kneels down, and he prays. And he asks Heavenly Father, all right, what else should I do today? So he's learning to get personal revelation and to get those answers. And it's been pretty interesting to come home and find out what he's done that day. Sometimes it's stuff as simple as, these are the answers he gets. Go build Legos with your sister. Go water the garden. Draw a picture. Go for a bike ride. Meditate. You choose something to do. So there's a whole nother element to what he's going through. When my oldest daughter attended Utah State University, on occasion she would ask her PhD grandfather, my father-in-law, for advice about her school decisions. He was very big into education, and he had 12 kids, so he was kind of worried. He wanted his kids to be educated. And when he passed away a few weeks ago, my daughter wrote this as a memory on Facebook of one of her conversations with him. This is what he said when she asked him. He said, he's in his 80s, "Take your time and don't worry about getting to some point. Plenty of us old people still don't know what we want to do with our lives, and we're still meddling around. You'll figure it out." What I want to do is help you figure out what's the best education for your child. I think all of us need to have this conversation with our children and say, hey, what's going to be best for you? And so these are just some general guidelines. This needs to be a playful, fun experiment, exercise. You're just sitting down with them and asking them some questions to see, where they're at. Don't judge your child's answers at all. Just encourage them to expand on the ideas, no matter how crazy an idea it might be. Write down the details, and then later you can refer back to them. So the questions to ask your child, even if you homeschool and think it's the greatest thing ever, you should do this. Ask them what their perfect day of learning is. What would it look like? How do you feel about the school you attend or about being educated at home? If you could change anything about it, what would it be? What subjects interest you that you aren't learning about in school? And how would you like more freedom to have time to try things you want to try? Then, when that's done, you go off with your spouse and have a discussion. Here's what Johnny said. And you talk about does my child plan on a path that requires a GED or a high school diploma, like maybe a trade school or something that requires it? What options are available to our family? And what experience do you think best meets your child's needs? So these are just a few starter questions. When it comes to options, there's lots. Seated in this group, I know there's at least 4 of you that have started various schools around Utah, and maybe even more that I'm not presently aware of. And more schools are opening every year. More opportunities. There's online stuff. So just writing down the list, there's public schools. You know your local one. You can also attend a different public school just outside your assigned area. There's charter schools with programs that do something different. There's dual enrollment where you say, okay, we're going to keep our child at school, but bring them home for 1 or 2 classes. That's a great way to start homeschooling and see how it goes. Just an experiment. There's online schools, charter and private or a la carte courses. There's private schools, homeschool, unschool, trade schools, and apprenticeships. And so once you've identified some options and discussed it, sit down again with your child and have another discussion with them. Discuss the options that are available and what they think of trying it. If it's a decision to give your child a lot more freedom to do what they would like to do, you can ask them, well, what kind of commitment are you going to make to having more freedom? How are you going to measure your own success and show yourself that you can do it? And this is not so that you as a parent can become a taskmaster and say, hey, you said this, you got to do this. It's to help them understand you created these guidelines, you created these benchmarks for yourself. Now, are you following through on these? Do you need to change your benchmarks? Did you set the bar too high? Are you can have that conversation, but it's for your child to learn to use their agency. And it may take some time. It may take weeks or months to deprogram their regular school experience and come to a point where they're like comfortable figuring out how to study and learn. As adults, we all go through the same thing when we want to learn something new. We have to figure out where to turn and, where do I find my mentors? Where do I find the good resources available for me? Okay, so remember this picture from the beginning. Our risk-taking declines as we age, because when we're young, we're more risk-tolerant because we know that time will let us course-correct for any losses early in life. Are our children really any different? I know one professor of engineering that was a math phobe, hated math, afraid of math, all through K-12. Age 26, she was in the military and decided, well, she got an assignment that pretty much required her to learn math. And it turned her into a professor of engineering, starting at age 26. So even though you think, oh my gosh, my child is ruined for life, we tried something different, that is not the case. All of us have probably learned things since high school that have been more valuable to us than anything we ever learned in high school. It's not going to ruin your child's chances of a scholarship or success in life to let them use their agency and find something that they have more joy in doing. Now, what I didn't cover earlier was, besides asking parents all those questions, I also asked for children's answers. I only got a dozen, and all of them were homeschoolers except one. And so I didn't really want to put anything much together, but there were a couple of comments that I thought I'd share. One commented that he wished he could go to school, but only stay till his work was done and then leave. I think, anybody else feel that way before? As soon as I get my work done, can I go? But then one other child commented, and he said, he can't do all the things he wants to do. I can't make explosives, fireballs, catapulter because I don't have the stuff. Come on, Mom and Dad, you've got a scientist in embryo. Get him the stuff. My hope is that all kids can make an explosive, fireball, catapulter, or whatever their heart wants to create and live their lives to the fullest. Talk to your children and let's activate their agency. Thank you.